Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on the latest research report that Invicti has released in partnership with ESG, titled Automated Application Security Testing for Faster Development. Today's session will focus on the topic of incorporating security into the software development process to secure web applications and APIs. But before we jump in, let me introduce myself and my colleague. My name is Sonali Shah, and I am the Chief Product Officer here at Invicti. I've been in the cybersecurity space for more than 20 years now, and I'm fortunate to be joined today by Frank Cattucci, CTO and Head of Security Research at Invicti. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Sonali, and thank you all for joining us today.
So let me start by giving a really quick overview of Invicti. Invicti's been a global leader in web application security since 2005. Today, we have over 3,000 customers that depend on us to accurately and efficiently discover and test their web applications and APIs. We offer three types of testing technologies, including software composition analysis, dynamic application security testing, and interactive application security testing, all automated throughout the SDLC. So, on to today's agenda. Today, we will dive into this latest research and cover the four key findings. Let's start with the first finding. There is currently a challenge in securing cloud-native applications. In fact, the report found that 9 out of 10 organizations are under pressure to deploy applications, infrastructure, and services faster than they did 3 years ago. Organizations are increasingly moving production workloads to the cloud for faster release cycles, and 55% say that securing apps has become harder than 2 years ago. Frank, what are your thoughts on why that is the case?
Sure. So there are a couple of different things that we're going to take a look at or discuss here today. The first would be faster release cycles and demands from developers. Developers are increasingly under added stress and pressure to release in a more agile and frequent fashion. That pressure to release and being time constrained results in code being pushed out faster. Not only that, but I would say that the amount of new tooling and new process that goes into all the development of this code also narrows down the time that can be spent on remediating by vulnerabilities that are found. In fact, Sonali, we know that, as pointed out, that 48% of developers are releasing code with known vulnerabilities. Now, it's not that the developers are wanting to release code with known vulnerabilities, but the fact of the matter is that under the constraints that the developers are currently in, and coupled with the fact that the code must be released in a certain time frame, the code is being released with those vulnerabilities. Now, those vulnerabilities, A, may have not have been found, or B, have been found and could not be remediated in time for release. In fact, I would say that Invicti Research has done some studies around this, and we actually found this to be a lot higher. So yes, we have this study that comes out around 48%. Our research is showing the actual number to be even closer to around 74%. And this is obviously an increased strain on not only developing processes and tools that can find this, but also remediating the code at an earlier stage that can reduce the amount of vulnerabilities being pushed forward.
Thanks, Frank. That's really a scary number. Looking forward to when that new research comes out. Let's move on to the second finding from our report with ESG, which is there is a need for complete coverage embedded into developer workflows. Now, this is something that the ESG research showed, but we also see within our own customer base that customers are increasing the number of apps and APIs tested and the frequency of testing. There is a move to continuous application security starting from development and continuing into production. In fact, one Invicti customer that was interviewed for this study said, "We don't want to have to run scans at the end of a project and find the problems and have to rebuild everything. It's just inefficient." Frank, in your mind, what has caused this move to continuous security?
The continuous security comes from a few different things. I think that we look at security as being more of a posture in a a posture at a point in time, meaning that something that's secure today may or may not be secure tomorrow. There's an evolution of things like vulnerabilities, proofs of concepts, exploits, etc., that are constantly evolving, meaning that we look at like the log4j issue that came up. The day before that broke, all of the scanning and everything that was being done was reporting, okay, we are secure, nothing is vulnerable. That's great. The next day, something comes out where there's a new exploit or a new vulnerability, and now that component that was secure the day before is now a major attack vector for nefarious folks across the internet. I think the largest problem there is that this has to be a continuous process in order to avoid the possible impact of a vulnerability and something new that's found. If you're doing this at a continuous level and you know that you are continuing to scan or provide AppSec services for your software development, at an interval that we are also producing things like signatures that detect these new vulnerabilities, then we can address those much earlier. We know that, application downtime, government regulations, there's a lot of things that go into involvement of finding and remediating these vulnerabilities, and knowing that you must be constantly secure and continuously secure and not just secure at a point in time. And we're looking at that from a different perspectives as well. Previously, having a pen test or a point-in-time pen test was adequate for a lot of regulations and a lot of compliance. Nowadays, we know that the regular scanning and testing of those applications is mandatory for certain government regulations. So the continuous scanning is almost a must to ensure that the posture of your web applications remains secure from day to day, not just a point in time at a periodic monthly, weekly, yearly scanning interval. I think that's important to recognize here as we go forward. The major point that I'd like to make here is that when we look at people's uptime for web applications is increasingly important. Oftentimes we choose the 5 nines as an industry standard, meaning that if we're going to have a commercial application that's available, we're looking for 99.999% uptime. Now, the staggering number here that was found is that 41% of all application downtime was the result of an attack, meaning that there was an exploit or a vulnerability that was being exploited that resulted in the downtime for the application, or there was remediation time that needed to go into that application, therefore rendering that service unavailable at 41%. So if we look at all of the downtime when we're shooting for industry of 5 nines uptime, and we say that almost half is due to application security related issues, this is something that must be addressed in a continuous manner and must be addressed in a constant manner to avoid that downtime and loss of possible revenue. Now, the downtime is not always just the only factor. The downtime has costs, we know that, but there are also costs of labor cycles, people cycles. There's costs of fines, regulation violations. There's costs of lost revenue. All of this equals to around 4 million or 4.2 million for the average data breach. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the study and research shows that 1 out of 5, meaning 20% of all data breaches, exceeds a $20 million expenditure for that exact breach, meaning that, okay, you get breached, it's going to be bad. You're going to suffer an average amount of 4 million. But if that happens 5 times, one of those, or 1 out of 5, 20% of those breaches is going to cost you an excess, or well in excess of $20 million in losses. So application security return on investment right there in itself is something that often gets neglected or not talked about. But if you look at the cost of the breach, and most of these that are using a web application as that kind of entering factor or that point of entrance, that needs to be reduced, that's a substantial cost savings ahead of time.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, I've seen, as I mentioned, I've been in the security space for several years now. And these numbers, the 41%, the 4.2 million really highlight the importance of application security. And, even within our customer base, I've seen companies that would do dynamic application security testing maybe quarterly, then monthly, then weekly. And now we actually have a number of customers that are scanning nightly. So that definitely points to this continuous scanning and the need for that to reduce downtime as well as cost efficiency. So thank you for that. We're now going to go on to finding 3. So the report also found that organizations can turn security into enablers instead of blockers that derail development. So this is really a shift. For years, Frank, we have seen this conflict between development and security, and that tension is what has slowed down adoption of DevSecOps. So, Frank, can you talk a little bit about how organizations can actually turn security into enablers?
Absolutely. This is one thing I'd say that is probably one of the more important things that we can touch on here, right? One is, as I mentioned earlier, and we discussed, Sonali, having the agile methods and releasing more often, and that constant pressure on the developers to deliver more code quicker in release cycles, releasing up to multiple times per day, has changed how we need to implement and work in security from a DevOps or DevSecOps perspective. What we're looking to do here is not slow the developers or the engineering teams down. We need to enable them. But one thing we need to make sure of is that we are an enabler and not a blocker. So what we need to do, and one customer has put it fairly eloquently, we can't get a group to do something fundamentally different than what they're doing each day, meaning that the AppSec focus and approach needs to be very dev-centric and dev-friendly. And that will really enable success and adoption among those developers. So what we need to do is integrate into their native tooling, anything that starts with essentially security planning and design, all the way through the IDE to the code that's being written to being deployed into various environments and pipelines. We need to integrate directly into the native tooling, the native CI/CD, and the native workflows. We need to be embedded into those developer workflows to be effective and not a hindrance to the current constant pressure that they are to develop and release more features frequently. In fact, Sonali, I think one of the more interesting things that we've found here and that we've used our own research for is that when we look at our integrations from the Invicti perspective, the most widely and I would say fundamentally leveraged integrations are Jira and Jenkins. Now, we know that developers and engineering groups are using Jenkins for continuous integration, continuous delivery. We know that we are using Jira for development tools and ticketing and design. So as the integrations are native, meaning we're providing these native integrations into the developer workflows, that's something that we need to take advantage of and enable the development communities and enable the developing groups to adapt into their existing tooling. And that's precisely what we're doing. And that's the importance of not becoming the roadblock, if you will, but becoming the enabler, giving the developers the feedbacks, opening the tickets with the correct remediation guidance, perhaps blocking a build or blocking a deployment into a certain environment if there are issues, but then providing that feedback and then an instant retest that is clean, and then boom, it moves out into maybe a different deployment environment or something of that nature. So, enabling that development community, enabling the developers and those workflows into the native tooling, taking advantage of our integrations that are most widely used, like Jira and Jenkins, are really vital to becoming effective in a AppSec program, a modern software development shop, and modern SDLCs.
Thanks, Frank. That actually leads really well into our last finding that we're going to discuss, which is Invicti helps you continuously secure all of your applications and APIs to reduce risk. And you just touched on one of the key ways that we help our customers do that. It's through integrations and automation and embedding security within the software development lifecycle. But then there's also a couple of other things that our customers really benefit from. One is high accuracy, right? Because if it's all of your workflow is embedded, as you were saying, right, results go right into Jira. If the results are false, it's sort of garbage in, garbage out. So that, along with the automation, is something that is really important that Invicti helps customers with. And then also speed, right? Because you were talking about breaking the build. Well, if you want to be in the pipeline and break the build, scans need to be complete in minutes, right? Not hours or days. So these are some of the ways that we help our customers. But Frank, if you could elaborate on that point a little bit more, I think that would be helpful.
Sure. Sonali, if there's one thing you said that hits home here, I'm going to, before I get to this, I'm going to really touch on the accuracy piece, right? So I mentioned earlier the need for proper remediation guidance and things like the integrations with Jira. But before that, much before that, is the false positive and that accuracy of the finding. It takes very few false positives for developers to lose faith in a tool or a process. We need to continue, and we do a great job with proof of exploit and things of that nature to provide those extremely low to zero, close to zero false positive ranges, right? So we are doing everything we can to deliver the best product with the least amount of false positives possible. And that builds the trust up, and the trust in the results, and the trust in the knowing that when something is found, it's actionable, it is a real risk, it is proven that needs to be fixed. So that is key, and it's vital. Now, also, we know that finding things earlier in the SDLC saves money, right? The quicker we can fix these before they hit production, the faster that code will be back on track and that app will be available, and the least amount of money or cycles that it will cost to fix that. Now, I would say that part of that, and we look at here for a leading network company that is one of our clients, the ease of use and the lower barrier to know that they're running a test or fixing a weakness before that ends up in production and costing them money is extremely beneficial. But more to that, knowing that the accuracy of that result is going to be something that they have faith and trust in. And that's how our product really stands alone as some of that goes forward, and being able to stay, again, on a budget and complete those projects. I would say that the other piece of this, and we talk about ROI on AppSec, and it's constantly that battle that, okay, if I put this money in, what am I getting out? We can talk about breaches, we can talk about downtime, but as I mentioned earlier, cycles, right? People time and our cost is costing you money. Every time someone puts a development hour or a troubleshooting hour into a specific vulnerability, that is time that they're not doing other things. Now, if we look at putting numbers to that or putting a monetary type of value on that, we're talking about 10 to 15 hours of time per person that we are saving. And this is coming directly from a global travel company client. And just that in itself, right? We are seeing a tremendous amount of ROI that has been often disputed, but we have customers that are telling us that we are saving them this time per person that could be dedicated to other resources. And if we look at this on a yearly basis, again, we are talking a CISO telling us, hey, we're saving an average around $180,000 a year in cycles and hours that we're putting into this by utilizing your product. Then that ROI argument not only becomes effective, but it becomes very, very relevant in the discussions going forward for your overall security budget and posture as a whole.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I think that last quote, saving $180,000 in the first year alone really comes from these points that you touched on, right? The automation, the accuracy, and quick scan time is what really enables our customers to continuously secure all of their web applications and APIs in a very cost-effective manner. Thanks, Frank, for joining me on this webinar today. And thank you all in the audience for your time.
Thank you for having us, Sonali.